Okay, I want to give you a few thoughts, my opinions on mindset in the mountains, and this is something you can apply to being in the great outdoors in general. But I'm going to use a few examples for being in the mountains, particularly in winter. And the first thing I want to talk about is basics. Professional sportsmen are a really good example of this. If you look at people like, go on YouTube and look at people like Roger Federer and his training. Look at the All Blacks, documentaries that have covered them. You know, every day, every time they do a training session, they focus on the basics and they get the basics absolutely right. And it's really interesting to see. You know, that is then the foundation for them for the top level of sport. And it's, you know, if we get the basics right, everything else, a lot of other things should follow. You know, if I use an example like in the mountains, you know, when you either the start of your ski season, mountaineering season, whatever it is, just go back to basics and get those basics, get on top of them, get them absolutely right, and then everything else should follow from there. The next thing then is details, and looking and having an eye for the detail and knowing what details are important. Now, we probably all know people who we have worked for who think that every detail is important and getting right into the detail is really important, and that's not the case. You definitely need to have an eye for detail, and that's certainly something I aspire to, but it's knowing which details are important. So for example, out here in the mountains, looking at, when you're out and about and you're on a ski tour, looking out for maybe some of the red flags, avalanche red flags. Is there avalanche activity? If so, on which aspects, at what altitude, and so on. So you're starting to really read the detail. And this is linked to type 1 and 2 thinking. An excellent book you may well have heard of called Thinking Slow and Fast by Daniel Kahneman. So, you know, type 1, system 1 thinking is instinctive, but it doesn't necessarily crunch the numbers. And if you look at system 2 is when you stop, you look at something, you do the maths, you crunch the numbers, and you work out whether something is right or not. And really, we want to be doing a bit more type 2 thinking, looking at something. Is it right? What do I think about that? Rather than saying, yeah, that looks kind of about right. Yeah, we do have a gut about things, and that is important. You do need a gut instinct, and you develop that over time. It comes with experience. But the type 2 thinking, where you stop and look at something and you really process it, that's really important. So getting into the detail. And then the final thing I want to talk about is a learning culture. And really, we want to learn rapidly from our own mistakes and the mistakes of others. This does require quite a good degree of honesty, which a lot of us don't have, and being honest about ourselves and whether we've made a mistake or not, and analysing what we've done. Another book I will reference here is Black Box Thinking by Matthew Syed. Really, really good, and it references the aviation industry, who are fantastic at this. They're really, you know, clearly because of a lot of aviation accidents over the years, they've really improved their processes, and they've got an excellent learning culture, and they spread any accidents or anything they learn rapidly across the aviation industry really quickly. It also talks about David Beckham, who I'm a real fan of, and he's a good example of someone who has learnt from his own very small mistakes. You know, but he get to the point where he could do over 2,000 keepy uppies, and so things like that. His free kick taking, all that has come from practicing over and over again, but learning from small little mistakes. So, you know, again, something I apply when I'm out in the mountains. At the end of the day, if I'm doing a multi-day tour, at the end of the day, think, right, what went well, what didn't go well, and learn from that, so that the very next day you can you can put those things in practice. So those are just a few thoughts of mine, that some approaches and the mindset when we're out in the mountains or the great outdoors.